welcome. My name is Will. Obviously, I'm a chair at this session, and today I'm going to be running a module on adaptive team building. What it would look like, and how one would go about actually doing it. Because I often think it's something which, for people in EYP, they kind of get a bit scared of, and it's kind of going off the rails a bit, and something that's quite difficult. But I want to just kind of dispel a few myths, why you would use it and such. So again, as you can see, I've got the document there. If you want to flick through it, it's going to be the thing that we're going to be working off. We might share the screen a few times, just kind of focus on some of the things that I've put down. But anyway, yeah, so the plan for today is just to kind of give an introduction just on how this module is going to look. I'm kind of going to discuss some of the problems that we see, which adaptive team building can kind of help solve. What you need to know really, which again is very little in order to do this, and how you go about doing it, which is kind of these three levels that I like to think of adapting your team building based on your topic. How it helps you as a chair, how it helps your delegates, and finally like a short Q&A at the end. So yeah, that's the plan so far. And I guess I'll start with the introduction. Let me just share my screen. So yeah. Second, there we are. Yeah, so I think in EYP, a problem that we have is that as chairs is that we often think that we have kind of two goals, which is to try and get the best best outcome of the resolution, kind of our topic that we're given, which we have the topic overview, the process, and then kind of trying to get the best content imaginable, trying to change the world and trying to create these real solutions. Then on the other side of things, we also recognize that the delegates that we have and the people that we come here to have fun. They come here not just to kind of engage with the topics, but to engage with the different people around them, the different cultures, getting on with people, but also to try and develop as people themselves there. So I mentioned it in the introduction there. A problem that in EYP is that there's a trade-off between the level of content that the committee produces and then the personal development of each delegate. We view it that the more time we assign to one, the less we assign to the other. And as a result of that, we feel like we have to make a choice. So yeah, you can see it here, which I have is I categorize it as a zero-sum game. And I often hear, and I think a lot of people here would often agree, that these two statements, I care more about my delegates' personal development than the content that they produce, is a line we often hear, and then also that my chairing style is very academically focused. And I take issue with these two statements, and they're kind of at polar ends of it. And I think that there's something wrong with these statements, which is that quite simply, I think you can do both, and as a chair, you should always be trying to do both, and seeing how the things that you feel that you're focused on can actually help the side of things that you're not. And I think it's quite clear from our experience in EYP and hearing and talking to many others that a delegate can get a lot of fulfillment, a lot of personal fulfillment, and can get a lot of personal development for actually engaging with the topic itself, and working towards it. And that can really be a great part of it and a great memory for them. I think a lot of people, a big thing is getting to do an attack speech or a defense speech, and that can give them a lot of positive feelings and feel like they've actually developed coming from the start of the session towards the end. And at the same time as well, you think the more that a person and the people within your group kind of get on and develop within your committee, and the more they feel confident that they're kind of evolving as a person while they're there. If everyone's experiencing that, then that should also lead to better discussion, better group dynamics, and effectively a better level of content that the delegates produce in their discussions, but also in the resolution. So I feel that with those two statements, it's a bad way of looking at it, because I feel like personal development and the kind of content that a committee produces are incredibly intertwined. And I think as a chair, your aim should try and recognize that and try and focus on those two things at all times. And I think that's the best thing you can do for your committee. Then we kind of come to, I think, a problem that we have a lot in EYP, which is how we define our work. What we do as chairs. And yes, you have GA, but the core tenet, the core parts of chairing, are team building and committee work. And the more you reflect on these, you think they aren't really helpful if you're trying to achieve both, like engagement with the topic and higher content, as well as personal development at the same time. Because obviously when you think team building, you think, getting to know each other, group dynamics, all these things. And then when you think of committee work, you just think, right, now that's the only time that anyone is going to have anything to do with the topic. And so you almost feel that, and also you see in EYP, there's a lot of things transferring from team building to committee work, because it almost seems a lot of the time that as soon as you reach the end of committee work, it's like, that's it. There's no more fun. There's no more focusing on us as people and, what we want to get out, our fears, our hopes. We just go straight into the topic. So it's kind of that delineation, which I think, just from those names, which I think is bad. And it's contrary to what we just suggested what a good chair should do, because as we see, it doesn't allow you in that setup and in that structure, it doesn't allow you to focus on those two things at once. So yeah, how would we go about doing that? And I think a really good way of doing it is adaptive team building. So actually doing it, I think this is a really good example. So below we kind of have a photo of, if you've been following Wimbledon recently, Andy Murray and Serena Williams have kind of teamed up in the doubles for the competition. And then on the right, you kind of have I don't know if anyone's seen the film Armageddon, in which a bunch of oil drillers are decided to go up into space and destroy an asteroid. So yeah, that's basically the plot of the film. Why it's not astronauts that learn to oil drill is another point entirely. But aside from that, those are the two examples. And my question there is, what do these two groups have in common? Because, and I, think about it for a second. And what do those two groups, you think for a second, okay, completely different, but they're both, when you look at them, you think there are a couple of things similar, which is that they're each a team. They need to communicate to each other. And then finally, they have a common objective that they want to work towards. So effectively, right, that's all they really have in common. Winning a doubles match in tennis versus destroying an asteroid are very different tasks. And then even then, you can kind of look at each of these, like, what type of team are they? What type of communication do they need to engage in? And then what even is their common objective? And you can see even in those, they vastly differ from one another. And as a result of that, you kind of have this question, which I think is always good to ask, which is, if you're going to leave a team building for, Andy Murray and Serena Williams to kind of help prepare them, for Wimbledon versus, the Bruce Willis and Owen Wilson for Armageddon, would it be the same team building structure? I think the quite obvious example is no, it wouldn't be. Because again, they're completely different objectives, skills, and parameters for what they're trying to do. They each have very different tasks, and that each of those different tasks requires a different type of team building. And so linking it back to EYP, that kind of comes back to the topic, which is that we discussed a whole array of issues in EYP. So many different types of committees, so many different types of topics, that to think that there's just kind of one standard team building approach that you need to prepare each committee to talk about a topic, is wrong. And a good way of thinking about this is that, you adapt your team building style based on the types of people you have, whether you have a much more energetic group, whether you have a much more shy group, and you naturally incorporate into your team building, because that is what is expected of you to do. And I feel like this is just the adaptive team building based on your topic is just realistically the other half of that. So I don't think it's that big a thing to do, but I think it does make a big difference in terms of, again, getting the most out of your committee, but also giving them the most as a chair as well. And then, so how would you go about doing it, I guess, is the second part, the kind of the core part of this module. And I think there, just to start with, there's only really three things that you need to know in terms of just in order to understand this idea, which is that the types of topics that exist within EYP. Now, obviously, the big ones that we talk about, we've heard this all the times. If you listen to lots of modules in EYP trainings, you hear this idea of strategic, creative, and kind of moral topics. So topics that kind of focus around these things. Strategy in terms of figuring out what is the best possible solution, choosing between a lot of things, having a lot of different interests and people and different organizations at play. Creative, coming up with solutions to problems, and then kind of the moral aspect, which is kind of deciding what's right and wrong on things. So those are the three kind of core types of topic that we think about in EYP. But I'd stress that what I want is that I feel that these are problematic, because I feel like all of these three different ideas can exist within the one topic. So what I suggest you to do is think of them as themes within topics, because as we'll see, you can see that, how would you structure your team building when you feel you've got, elements of strategic, creative, and moral, all at the same time within your topic. So again, I'd like you to think of them as themes. So coming on to the 3 levels of adaptive team building. And you see the first level that we have is quite simply matching your team building approach to the topic as a whole. And I think this is something that, whether you're chairing at a regional, a national, a forum, or an international session, I think this is something that you should be doing, which is that, as a chair, you've written your topic overview, you've looked at it, you've studied it, you've thought about it, you've had potentially maybe some interaction with your delegates. You know how much time you're going to have for team building. You know how much time you're going to have for committee work. You know all those things, right? So I think taking all those into account, if you feel that there is, one big, issue, or if your topic does mainly fall into one of these types of themes, you should be doing this, right? And so, for example, if it falls into the kind of the creative topic, then I feel that what you should be doing as a chair is structuring your team building around, encouraging more personal freedom and autonomy, which is this, this idea of letting the chairs take ownership. Letting the delegates rather take ownership of the process and feel like their original ideas are welcomed and encouraged. And it's again goes back to this idea of this general focus on positive brainstorming, suggesting ideas, and then at the same time putting those initial ideas into realities. So kind of a number of games focused on that. I feel like if you have more of a moral topic, what you then obviously need to structure your team building in general about is like how your committee and how your delegates handle difficult conversations. Because I feel like the whole point of moral topics is that they are conflicting. There's not necessarily one right answer. So the idea there is that you need to, as a chair, figure out, okay, I've got a bunch of different people with a bunch of different opinions that come from a real place on this topic. How am I meant to get them to communicate and talk in a positive and respectful manner and in a constructive manner, so that you can actually reach some consensus on things and take a step forward with your committee work, right? And again, I think it's venturing those things and spending and emphasizing a lot of time about those difficult conversations and overcoming them. And then you have the strategy element, which again is you're juggling multiple balls in the air. So it's this idea of structuring committee work so that your committee can handle a lot of interconnected problems that are all going on at the same time, but at the same time ensuring that they're able to handle it. And what I mean by handle it is that assign enough time to their problems and feel like they can get everything done as efficiently, as quickly as possible, whilst addressing all these issues. So like a big emphasis on time management, a big emphasis on speaking promptly, but also being just very brief, but very punctual and in what you're saying and how you're saying it, and doing that in a constructive manner, so that people are being respected and listened to, but at the same time it's the committee's moving along and progressing. So that's again the first level, and I feel like any level of chairing, you should be able to do this. You'll have a good understanding of your topic, and I think you can take small steps in those directions to structure around there. So then we're kind of going to move on to the second aspect of we're going to move on to the second level, the step forward, the next thing you're doing about how you can better adapt your team building to your topic. And I'm just going to we're going to move on to the next level there, and the next level on that specifically is targeting aspects of your topic through specific team building games. And remember when I said earlier this idea that you want to think of your topic, not topic types, but themes within the topic. And the argument there is that you could have a whole heap of themes of like strategy, conflict, and moral existing within your topic. But a further example is that you can break these themes down into even more specific examples. Okay, so what we see here is that again you can break them down into much more specific ideas. So in terms of strategic, you're going to have kind of ordinal issues. So when I say ordinal, it's like ranking which procedure is better, which procedure is worse. Let's say you've got 10 of these, you need to select 4. How are you going to decide which are the best practices and how you can go about doing it? So that's ordinal. And an example of that is renewable energy investment. You have wind, solar, fracking, geothermal, all those sorts of things. How do you decide which is best, or which are the best 3? And then you have a more head-to-head, which is kind of conflicting ideas and conflicting interests. And a good way and a good topic around that is the idea of welfare policies, which is the idea of, who are you giving resources to, and is that taking away from other people, and which people are more important? And in this setting, you're somewhat hampered by the amount of resources that you have, and it's this kind of battle of who deserves what, and who deserves what more than the other. And it goes back to that zero-sum example. So that's a good idea of, a good topic around that is welfare policies. And then finally, resource allocation is, again, who should get what, but by how much. And again, that falls, again, if you have lots of interest groups, and private sector, public sector, unions, all those sorts of things, you can see that, resource allocation, that is, becomes its own theme within, a strategic topic. And so examples that you can, of games you can play, and I'll just scroll down here, because the whole point of why you'd be doing this, why you'd be structuring, your games for your topic, is that if you think that a type of issue is going to exist in your committee, which they're going to have to overcome, there's a direct problem in which they're going to have to sort and figure out, what you're trying to do is you're trying to pick a game or a task which best replicates that type of roadblock that your delegate's going to reach in committee work. So it's best replicating, obviously not connected to the topic itself, best replicating the type of problem they're going to have to be dealing with. And the whole point is that how they operate and deal with that problem now, or that type of problem now, gives you ideas on what they need to work on, what they did well, for the problem when they reach in committee work. So it's not a new problem for them. They've already dealt with that problem. Yes, it's different information and it's a different topic, but it's still the same sort of problem. And the group dynamics and the practices that they agree on now, after doing that in team building, are going to transfer over. So we've gone through the strategic there, and the different types of games you can play there. Then you have creative, and you have different types of creative themes within topics. So this idea of repurposing or reimagining things that already exist, which haven't been working, but they need to be made better. And in EYP, a thing that we always look to is the Common Agricultural Policy. How can you reinvent or redesign the Common Agricultural Policy? You have that base of policy in terms of making it better. And a good idea of that is this game that I always like to play, which is Bridge Over the River Kwai, in which you have two different groups side by side, and they need to create a rope to throw across the other, and they have to think of things that they can use, which are just on their person to best replicate what a rope is. They have to tie things up and think, okay, which of these items is going to help make the longest rope, because the river keeps on widening and widening. That's a very good one. And then you have inventing, completely issues and ideas that have never been touched on before, and you need to completely be new and creative, and that's like the most traditional form of creativity when we think of it. And a good example of that is new biodiversity policies, just an example, or even again, issues that haven't really been thought of until the time you're actually discussing it. And I think a good one there is the idea of like the spaghetti and marshmallow structure, where you get your committee to kind of create something entirely original on their own, but it has to meet it has to solve a specific problem. But again, encouraging creativity on that, and how the group actually creates something. And then finally, you have squaring the circle, which in terms of inventing something which solves a problem, although by its very nature you think it what I mean by squaring the circle is trying to solve a problem that exists with something new, but the problem has been seen as a problem that can't be solved, like an unsolvable problem, a Gordian knot, if you want to be specific about it. And I think a good example there of trying to encourage games which best replicate that situation is the idea of a spider's web, which is a game that we always play. But what I like about it is that the delegates look at the problem and think, there is no way we're going to sort this out, and tell them, yes, you're going to have to do that. And most of the time they eventually do, and they come up with solutions which directly try and respond to a problem which they previously thought they couldn't solve. And again, how they interact with this and what they learn from it translates into committee work, which I think is very useful. And then finally, we're going to look at value-based, which I kind of describe as trade-offs, morality, norms. So in terms of trade-offs, we're speaking at two conflicting values. The more you lean into one, into one value, the more you kind of lessen the other. And a good example of that is security versus civic freedoms, about like governments monitoring us versus having the right to privacy. And that's a very classic topic that we've covered. And then a good game to talk about that is, I don't know if you've ever seen the film Lone Survivor with Mark Wahlberg. It's like it's a moral quandary in which you have to make one decision which has a knock-on effect, for which you have a known consequence, and you have to decide how you want to go about doing it. And then you have just a very basic kind of morality thing, which is deciding what is right. Just trying to, as a group, deciding what is the right thing to do. I think a good game for that classically is just the trolley debate. If you don't know what the trolley debate is, look in. It's a very well-known kind of philosophical dilemma, which again is just, forces you to acknowledge what is the right thing to do. And then finally, when we talk about norms, it's this idea of balancing what is important to us in society and what we feel is acceptable behavior and isn't, and how we operate on that. And I think Abigail is a perfect one, links in perfectly to that, and it's tied directly in. And so again, going back to this, I think it's very good. I think, even at a regional session, you should be able to do, maybe one of these games, potentially, depending on the amount of time you have. If you feel like, for instance, if you're talking about an abortion rights, and you feel like there's going to be one big roadblock that the committee is going to come to, doing one of these games, I think, can be really helpful in kind of testing the waters on what type of committee you have, and how you can go about helping them to have to be effective in their conversations moving forward into committee work. And then finally, we kind of come to, or what I'd say on that as well is that you can even potentially alter games somewhat, just to kind of highlight. If you prefer certain games, you can twist the rules around a little bit so that you emphasize it. So, for instance, going back to the strategic type of game, if you're playing Plane Wreck, which is one you have to decide which are the three most important things. So you could do that, and you could do the three most important things, but you also feel like you feel like there's going to be some form of head-to-head as well. So what you can do is, after they've had to agree on these three things, you split them up, and then you say, okay, you can only choose one. And then the two groups have to come together and argue which is more important than the other. So, twisting the rules and the aims for the group can be really helpful in that. And you can do that as a chair to, again, tweak it to kind of suit what you need for this second level of adapting your team building. And then finally, when we kind of look at the third level, which I think is probably the most advanced level in talking about adapting your team building to your topic, is literally adapting and altering specific team building games which actually revolve around the content of the topic. So again, I'd like to think of this as a very easy extension of level 2. When you've identified the themes that you feel like are going to exist in the topic, and you picked the games that you want to best replicate those themes, and then you tweak it so that the content of those games either indirectly or directly touch on that aspect of the topic. This is I feel like for me, this is a great opportunity as a chair to get creative in incorporating the topic into team building and thinking of different ways that it can. And ideally, what is very good about this as well is that it kind of gives you an insight into how the delegates, their kind of instinctive feelings about the topic, and where their head is at with these things. I think it's a really good insight, and what can be really helpful is that they've already kind of danced around the topic a little bit, and they've kind of thought about things, and again, kind of working things out a little bit of even before they start on committee work, which I think as a chair, knowing that and delegates actually having going through that as well can be very helpful. And again, it goes back to this idea that if they're kind of talking about these issues and they learn to kind of talk about these issues in team building, then in committee work, that's just going to happen. And it's going to be a natural follow-on because they've already experienced this. And again, I'd say this is the most challenging. It's probably the most organic one, which is very specific to the topic. But I'm just going to give a couple of examples of why you might, or how you might go about doing it. So for me, when I've shared in the past, I had a topic on the gig economy, which obviously is around money and about wages and how much people are getting paid, and whether or not it's fair that with the working conditions they have to experience, whether or not how much they're being paid is fair. So what a good thing to do is that to maybe incorporate like a committee currency in your group, and that kind of can give financial incentives and adds that kind of money element into how people are acting, because they have not just a goal of finishing a goal of a task, but also you have that financial incentive, and how people act with financial incentives without them, how they see them, and then kind of the discussion they have about that can be really helpful in talking about it. Again, moving towards more the kind of the value side of things, Abigail, I think, is really a great template for any kind of value-based topic if you want to try and, you know, dance around the issues before discussing them in committee work, because the story itself is, you know, it's very easy to adapt. It's very easy to alter information. For instance, you know, it's very easy to swap genders, and to kind of add different elements and dynamics, which can kind of change the typical conversation that you'd expect from Abigail. And it can be really helpful, again, in getting the delegates to kind of engage with the topic and, you know, really think about it. A very weird one was similar to the same topic I was chairing. Again, I wanted delegates to kind of think about money because, you know, some of them might have worked, some of them wouldn't have. And what I did was that I adapted Abigail, and instead of using the general plot, I still kept the same number of characters, the same names, but I based the plot somewhat off the Merchant of Venice, which is this idea of people being lent money, lenders extracting revenge for not paying it back, you know, and all this sort of thing about how people act around people who when they know the amount of money they have or what they do with their money. And I think it provoked a really interesting discussion about from my delegates about how they thought about money and people acting with it. And I thought it was really useful when it came to actually discussing the big ideas in committee work, to got them to address they addressed them before, and then when they addressed them the second time, it's, you know, there's much more cohesive, and it kind of got to that, like, that extra layer of discussion, which I think is all of this is for, to kind of to get to that next layer of discussion, that next level of depth, for your committee, which again I think is, you know, really important as a chair. But what I'd say to bear in mind with all these things is that, especially with the third level, is that it's very demanding. In order to come up with a game, you're obviously having to think of something completely different, and you're very much having to think of how, if you introduce these new things, how the delegates are going to perceive it, but also how it affects the rules of the game, your expectations, or what specifically you want to get out, and whether or not the game still works if you're introducing these new ideas. So it obviously takes a lot of time to think and plan that out. And obviously those games you want to be devoting more attention to them than not. So if you don't have that much time for team building, you know, bear that in mind, that it might not be the most useful part of your time, just because you don't actually have that much time, and, you know, core general things of, you know, getting a team working together obviously still ring true. And these are kind of accessories and extensions of team building, and kind of, you know, that cherry on top, especially with the third level. But going back to the first and second, you're going to be, you know, structuring your team building one way or another, and I think it's good to do that. And then the second level, you're going to be playing some of these games anyway, so why not pick the games that best suit the topic that you're going to be discussing? And, you know, the first two are kind of, again, require less attention or less resources and capital, but I think they still are equally important to actually, you know, adapting your team building. And I guess the kind of, to sum this up, it kind of goes back to this issue of, you know, how does this help my committee and a chair? Yes, I've understood how I want to go about adapting my team building. I know the different themes, the types of games I want to play with them, and I've even thought of a game that I could incorporate, which is kind of that third level. You know, what is the benefit from these things? And I guess that's what I'm going to discuss now, and kind of my experience as a chair and what I've seen, you know, in taking this approach and trying to adapt your team building and how it's helpful. So, you know, how it helps your delegates in my mind is that it goes back to what I've been saying, you know, they'll experience similar scenarios to what they face with their topic. And, you know, by doing so, it optimizes how they interact as a group, and, you know, how they interact as a group, how they talk, how they discuss the issue. And what that has is that it not only has a carryover for, you know, kind of being more effective in their discussions and committee work, but also it means, you know, a greater level of respect and a greater level of appreciation for every person in the group. Because I often feel that's a big issue in EYP. So understanding how to interact properly as a group and having that carryover to committee work means that in committee work, you know, people will be better respected and better appreciated, which is always a good thing. I think equally, coming back to personal development, there's this idea of there's more meaningful opportunities for them to experience personal development. Because the way I see it is that if you go through team building and thinking, gosh, there are things that I realized about myself that I would like to work on and improve. If you have a team building setup which is similar to the types of challenges that you're going to experience in committee work, those committee work challenges are going to be effectively second chances, or more opportunities for the chairs or for the delegates to specifically improve on the things that they identified in team building. And I think a lot of problem is that you can have team buildings which are very interesting, but then when it comes to committee work, it's a different kettle of fish, and they don't know how to take what they've learned from team building and improve on it in committee work. I think if you have that core link between the two, it really makes it a lot easier for the delegates to realize that and therefore actually go about doing it, which is really good. I also think as well, they'll see team building as having more of a purpose, and I think they'll enjoy it, because if they recognize that it's to do with the topic and interlinked, it can be really helpful. This kind of goes back to this idea that some delegates might not like team building and like committee work and vice versa. If they see, if delegates that are a bit shy and not too sure about team building and being integrated, but they know a lot about the topic, if they can kind of see trends and similarities with the topic, I think it's a good way to draw them in, and which is better because you have a more interactive and more a better team building where everyone is engaged, and I think that's a really good thing. And then finally, how it helps you as a chair is that, again, you get to see the committee. It's almost like a pre-screening to committee work, because what you do is you see how the committee interacts and how they're realistically going to be interacting when they come to that next problem in committee work. So it allows you to give you more time to plan and see how you can help them. And again, I'd say that as a result of that, your debriefing and suggestions will translate better into committee work, because again, you're effectively dealing with a team building which is designed to help you with committee work. So the suggestions that you give and what they recognize that they need to improve on in team building, what you help them recognize, will better translate, and they'll take it to heart more and better implement it, which is a good thing. And again, it relates back. You'll have a more engaged and interested committee throughout the whole process, with the committee work and team building. And again, I talked earlier about how how delegates who aren't so interested in team building, they'll get drawn in because there's links to committee work that they see. Equally, delegates that might be a bit less confident about committee work, if they've kind of somewhat discussed those issues in committee work, they'll see it as a platform to kind of be more involved in committee work, and also seeing that more opportunities for personal development in committee work will allow them to engage as well. I think that's good. And again, going back to it, there are better opportunities for you to help your delegates personally develop throughout the session, throughout the entire process, which I think is a really good thing. And finally, just to round it off, I'd say that in any leadership position, I think these concepts can be applied. Again, because you have some level of team building, whether you're a head organizer, a head of jury, or an editor, and taking these things of trying to replicate or best replicate problems or scenarios that you feel your team is going to be to encounter, that just leads to better practices. So yeah, that's my module. Sorry, Rob, Evan, thanks very much for being a part of this. I hope it was of some value to you. And again, any questions that I have, feel free to get in contact and I can help clarify them. Yeah, thanks very much.